We are going to talk about pigeon pose today, or figure four, whatever you want to call it. Traditionally, it is taught from downward facing dog, um, and it is external rotation of the hip, and then it could also be forward flexion of the pelvis over the hip joint. So it should look about like this bone does. Most of us, it doesn't come out like this. A lot of times, depending on the anatomy of the hip and the tissues, that leg comes to here, and then the yogi will bring the leg back to be able to get down to the floor. And if you notice, as I do this, there's some rotation at the knee. And the knee doesn't like that. And then you lay your body weight down on it. And you also have laid your body weight down on the hip joint if you flex forward. So a lot of things can go wrong here. So we're going to show some other options. If coming to figure four on the mat in the traditional sense doesn't work for you. Another thing I see a lot of times is a practitioner will, once this leg is in deep knee flexion, they'll pull their leg forward into this position. And obviously the tissues aren't allowing that to happen on its own. So if you can't get there purely from external rotation at the hip, or yes, and then forward flexion over the hip, then it's best to find another option. So here's a bunch of fun ways to do it. I'll move the bones out of the way. And this depends on the kind of class you're teaching or taking. If it is a class where a chair is accessible, you can come and have a seat in the chair. Those bones are in the way. And then from the front edge of the chair, with a neutral spine, we want to make sure we're not in flexion or extension, just neutral spine. And then we can take one leg and straighten at the knee. Then the other leg comes into hip flexion. We turn, externally rotate, and then bend at the knee to bring it above the other knee. Or we could slide it up. And then we start to bend the leg that was straight. And then from here, we could offer options like moving, letting your muscles move your bones here in and out of adduction and abduction. But notice if I bring, and I'll show up from the side, if I bend my knee anymore, notice I stop moving at my hip joint and I'm moving at my spine. So if the goal is to bring some mobility to the hip joint, then make sure you're actually bending at the hip joint and not moving into spinal flexion and folding over from there. So I like to call this tie your shoe pose. So I always like to find a functional use for whatever we're working on in class. So there's figure four from the chair. Nice option. Ooh, as I whack the bones. If you happen to be teaching and you've already brought the class to a seated position, here's another nice option. I like to use a blanket for this. Once again, we want to come at it from neutral spine. So if you see people sitting like this, offer a blanket so we can get them up to neutral spine. And then one leg goes straight, the other leg comes up. Here's that external rotation and the bend of the knee. And your ankle's going to be pretty far past your other thigh. We don't want this leg winging out to the side. Your leg should be in line with the hip. Then we could lean back like we're at the beach and then start to bend the knee again. Once again, when you start bending the knee, what are you bending besides the knee? This is me bending at the spine. So I'm not, if you look at the angle of my hip, it's not changing a whole lot. Now, if I stay in neutral spine, right there's my end range. There's where I'm bending at the hip joint. Now I'm working to hold this. I could come down here and it's easier. And then same thing. You can move the hip joint around a little bit. So this is nice. If your class is already on the floor, supine on the back, this is probably my favorite pigeon. Is leg comes up into flexion. Once again, we turn, external rotation, ankle passes the knee, And then this also uses the core. Notice I have an inward curve at the low back and the neck. So if we want to keep this as a hip pose to affect change of the hip, we need to make sure we're moving at the hip joint. So we could bring the leg up a little bit. So right about here, I'm moving at my hip joint. Notice the abdominal wall doesn't distend or anything. So we don't want this to happen. We're also not pressing down. So once I hit here, if I go any further, you'll notice now I'm bending mostly at my spine joint. Look at the angle of the hip, it's not changing. So if I want to keep it as a hip movement, I need to move at the hip. So I've blown way past it here. Which if we're lengthening back muscles, this is okay. So there's figure 4. And a nice option from here is to bring them back down and do a little gentle twisting from here. This usually feels good for people that are having low back discomfort. So the last two options are a little more challenging. I don't teach them nearly as much, but let's show them anyway. So this one is a leg lunges forward. I keep a blanket nearby. So I have 90-degree angles at hip, knee, ankle, and then knee, ankle on this side. Then I'm going to hinge forward across the hip joint, place the hands down, and it's basically as somebody just knocked me over. So shifting down. So you notice I'm leaning to this side. My right butt cheek is nowhere near the mat. So what I like to do from there is take a blanket and fill in that space. So this is more pure than the other versions for sure, in the sense that my femur is right in line with the hip. I've got a 90-degree angle here. I can have one at the ankle. Some people say it matters, some people say it doesn't. And then the same thing here, the back leg. So this is work here. Then from here, I could take the pelvis and rotate it forward over the leg bone. This is me moving at my spine though. So make sure pelvis rotates forward. You could also have some fun and use your glute medius, your side butt muscle, to try to lift this leg up and down. This is absolutely awful. So coming back out of these is a little more challenging. So we shift back up in that lunge, and then we would switch sides. Last option looks the most like traditional pigeon pose, where we come to downward facing dog. Bring the leg forward. Here's where we come into external rotation and come down on it. But like I said, most people are going to bend at the knee and the hip more. I'm sorry, bend at the knee more. And now if you look, the femur and the tibia are not tracking well. So that's why I just haven't taught that in years. I haven't practiced it in years, and I still have my original hips in my 60s. So let's try this last version. If you build the floor up for people, a lot of alignment problems go away. So bring the floor to meet you. Don't worry about getting to it. It's probably dirty anyway. So big bolster, big blanket, double folded, and you might actually need more upward support for this. So just like the last version, we lunge a leg forward. I am lining up my butt cheek on the right side with the props. Then the same thing applies here. It doesn't have to. You could stay up right here and do this. I could bring this leg across. And then feel if I'm moving actually at the hip as opposed to the foot and the knee. Then if I'm moving at the hip, then I can come down on it. So remember, the leg is not winged out to the side. This is external rotation of the femur and adduction, moving toward the midline. So this is pretty comfy. This is the version I do the least, but a lot of people like it. So from here, and if you see people leaning to the side like this, the tissues aren't allowing them to move into hip extension on the back leg or flexion on the front leg. So if you're here and everything is lined up, you can come forward a little bit. You can come forward across the hip joint. You can bend the spine forward here. Twisting is fun here. Yes. You could come back and flex at the knee and go for the heel. And like I said, this one is a little more challenging to come out of. A lot of injuries happen in yoga coming out of where you went. So there's several options here. I place the hands down and I take that forward leg and I sweep it around and bring it back. So that could always be done. And this could be done from downward facing dog. I'm just thinking through this as we go. This is for Sharon and anyone else. So you could place the hands down, leg up. This may or may not work. We may be cutting this part off. Draw the leg in, bring it around, and shift down into figure four and coming up. Coming down, curl the toes under, lift up, sweep that leg back. Ooh, you got to play around with that one and see if it works or not. I'm not real sure. Anyway, remember your hips only need a certain amount of mobility. Because when we have too much flexibility, we have instability. And that instability causes problems and pain, wearing out of the connective tissue of the joint. And unfortunately, you see hip replacements from too much mobility between the ball and the socket. So, socket, ball. It should be a nice tight, see, his knee wasn't pointing in the right direction there. It should be a nice tight fit. So we don't want too much instability in there. So be so careful when you're doing things to create mobility in your hips. And make sure you have just enough to do everything you want to do in your daily life. Remember, I call this tie a shoe pose. So, namaste.